Hola a todos, nuevamente estamos aquí. Hoy es un día especial, es un episodio especial. Tenemos a nuestro maestro, el sacerdote Richard Rohr, con nosotros. Y voy a dar una breve introducción sobre quién es nuestro maestro. El sacerdote es un sacerdote franciscano. Lleva más de 50 años en el ministerio enseñando alrededor del mundo. Sus enseñanzas están basadas en el amor de Dios y cómo nuestras prácticas espirituales nos ayudan a profundizar nuestra relación con Dios. Vive en Albuquerque, Nuevo México, y es director del Centro de Acción y Contemplación. Es autor de más de 30 libros y innumerables publicaciones alrededor de toda esta trayectoria que ha tenido en 50 años. Es conocido mundialmente y ha enseñado en muchos lugares alrededor del mundo. Puedo seguir dando más introducción sobre Father Rohr, pero nos vamos a pasar todo el programa, así que no. Welcome, Father Rohr. We're so thankful that you're here. I just gave a brief of your resume, of the accomplishments that you've made, and obviously the way you've impacted many lives, including ours. And so now we want to introduce you to the Spanish-speaking community. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, how kind of you to trust me without really knowing me. That's very good of you. Thank you. I hope I can say something that helps somebody.
I think so. I think James is going to start us.
No?
I'm sorry. James is going to start us with a question.
And I think we know you through your books. I myself have read 10 of them at least, of the 30-some that you've written. So just jumping right into the questions, Father Richard, on the subject of hurt people. At one point in one of the books that I've read of yours, you quote Frank Ostaseski, I hope I'm saying correctly, who wrote the 5 Invitations. And he said, you quote what he wrote, we don't get past our pain, we go through it and are transformed by it. And you yourself have said many times that what we don't transform, we transmit.
Yes.
And me and my brothers here on this call have experienced a great deal of childhood trauma in our lives. We avoided facing it, and in doing so have hurt ourselves and have hurt others. So can you please speak, Father, to the importance of facing and processing our traumas from your lens?
Boy, you dive right into it. This is the big stuff. I mean, really, I admire your courage for going there. You know, I'm not trying to be a Christian preacher in saying this, but because of the truth of what you said, I think that's why the symbol of the Christian religion became a crucified man, a naked, losing man. Because this has been the storyline of most people who've ever lived on one level or another, you know. It wasn't always childhood. You know, you think of the poor immigrants who come here to our border in New Mexico, and they've traveled so far and then they're turned away and rejected and humiliated. It's just, I don't know how God holds such pain. But the way I read the cross is not some doctrine of atonement, but it's God's total identification with human suffering. Now, the effect that can have, and you sound like you've already experienced it, is you don't play the victim. Playing the victim is a dead end. You have to go through it. You have to admit that it hurts, and maybe you have to play the victim for a few months, but you can't stay there because you get nowhere, huh? It's just to gain really power over other people because no one can touch a victim. So Jesus really showed us how to do the victim and win. You understand? By not creating other victims. And yet, the way you quoted me at first, That's what most people do, because they don't have a transformation agent, which I'm calling the crucified Christ. They just hand it on to their own children, to their own neighborhood, to their own church, to their own marriage. It's the norm. It's not the exception, it's the norm. A young man just left the house when Eli came in, who just told me his tragic story. Grew up in Missouri. It seems no matter where you're at, the advantage, if you'll allow me to say this, the advantage of being in any sense a minority is somehow you're not as surprised by that. You're not as shocked by that. It still hurts. But us white guys who think of ourselves as normal, we just don't. How can this happen to me? You understand? And people who are either minorities by reason of race, by reason of gender, by reason of class, they have sort of, yeah, this is the way it is. I mean, I don't mean to laugh at it, but it's true. It's like, I remember when Elias and I drove across Arizona and we were stopped by the cops twice. Have you told him that story?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. And I said, I've never been stopped all my life. And of course, he was driving and he has nice brown skin. And it was obvious to me. And I said, I think God let this happen so I could tell other people, now I know.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know. Because that's the only reason we were stopped, because of his brown skin. You know? So all I'm trying to say is, don't play the victim. You don't sound like you're doing that, even though you've got to feel the pain of being a victim, and don't make the mistake of victimizing anybody else. And if you were victimized by your fathers or anything like that, you probably know enough of your family story to know that they didn't have a very good father either. That's usually, Grandpa wasn't so good a man either. So that's all he knew how to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you addressed that, Father, earlier. It just keeps getting passed on generation to generation. Another question I have for you, Father Richard, is you've written about the death and resurrection of Jesus as representing a move from the false self to the true self.
Ah, you've read it already at a deep level. Very good.
What was your journey from who you thought you were, your false self, to the truth of who you are in the way that God sees you?
What book did you learn that from?
The Immortal Diamond, amongst many.
Oh, Immortal Diamond. Oh, very good. Have you read The Universal Christ yet?
I have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm honored that you would trust me. See, that's the real meaning of being born again. You know, the good evangelicals and Protestants, they use that word so much, being born again, and they're sincere. I respect them. But they're usually, what's born again is their false self. It's not their true self. They've just found a better way to be saved, or to be right, or to be moral, or to be whatever they've claimed as their credits. And it's because no one's taught them the real gospel. Just know that very small percentage of humanity. This is my belief, but it's after 50 years as a preacher and a priest. Very few people have heard the gospel, the real gospel. Very few. Most of them are just Catholics or Lutherans or evangelicals or Pentecostals. And that's okay. but it's only kindergarten, you know, that's only to get you started. Were you all three raised in the church, in some church?
Somewhat. Some of it, I mean, like in my case, I had sort of a what I call potpourri of doctrines, everything from Catholic to Pentecostal to evangelical. So yeah, just to kind of follow on what you're saying, what we've been talking about, all four of us have a common denominator of our story is that when we surrendered ourselves to the core of God's love is when our whole awakening and realization began. And then things began towards a desire to be transformed from the inherited toxicity that came from our, you know, whether it's our family roots or our parents or our dad or our fathers, you know, lack of love or negligence or any of the that fits our story. And just right quick, last night I was listening to Thomas Merton's, one of his lectures, and he talked about that when you show up to the monastery, he says, he goes, you have nowhere else to go. He goes, but basically the way he was saying is that you're literally surrendering to God's love. And that's why you have nowhere to go, because you're trusting God's love is going to take you wherever it's going to take you. And so I think that's what has been part of our four stories, is that when we got to the monastery, we had nowhere else to go but God's love and continue to surrender.
Wow. Wow. We don't need to say anything else.
No,
That's beautiful,
no.
Victor.
And I think we have addressed that every one of us faces the false self, true self dichotomy.
Yeah, me too.
You've, right?
Uh,
So having faced it, how can others navigate this path based on your own journey from false self to true self? What can you begin to share with us that we can then share with those that we're engaging with?
they can't get rid of their pain, and pain will come into every life until they've learned what it has to teach them. If they allow their humiliations to humiliate them, if they allow their mistakes to say, I'm not a perfect man, you know, if they learn the lessons from the dark side, we don't use the word dark side anymore because we're trying to get over color, dark color being bad and this lovely little white skin being good. But you know what I mean. We've got to learn from our falling. So have any of you read Falling Upward? Yeah. As long as you're willing to learn from your falling, God will, I promise you, move you from your false self to your true self. It happens automatically. You just sort of glide over. I sound like Donald Trump describing getting out of the coronavirus. but it's true. You can't believe those lies anymore. I'm good because I'm rich, or I'm good because I'm whatever. It's not true. You're good because you're a beloved son. And that experience of beloved sonship is the only guaranteed identity that no one can take from you. Have any of you done the rites of passage? Jose did, yeah. And you, yeah. Two of you did. Yeah.
You know, Father Richard, in Falling Upward, you talk about the creation of the container. So you're not saying that the false self is bad. It's something we all have to go through, right?
That's right.
But then there is, you mentioned that there's something that happens to us in midlife, some loss.
Usually, yes.
Makes us question. And that, in a way, helps us to move forward.
Yeah. Death accelerates the whole process. Any death close to us, even people right now, the amount of people who are facing their death through COVID-19, this has got to be growing up a lot of people. But the growth of the death of one of your children or your partner or your parents. For most of us, it's the death of our parents. Even sometimes if we didn't think they were very good parents, they were still the first human beings we met. And when they don't exist anymore, it's traumatic, you know? They don't have to have been perfect. So death is the biggest teacher of all. Suddenly it clarifies the whole screen, that nothing lasts forever, and I'm not going to last forever, and you won't either. Yeah.
So
go ahead, James.
In that inevitability of death, the surrender to that helps us to. Is that what I'm hearing, Father?
Yes, you used the right word. Inevitability, not fear of death, the inevitability of death. You understand? Because I hope Eli has given you enough good theology. There's nothing to be afraid of in God. Nothing. Nothing. God's on your side. But most of us weren't raised in any churches unless you had an exceptionally holy pastor or priest. They don't know that. They really think you've got to earn God's love. And you can't earn what you already have. Now, if any of you had father wounds, that makes it even harder to believe God the Father could love you, as you know.
Yeah.
This man's already passed that test.
All four of us have had father wounds.
Yeah.
And that I think have gone through your rites of passage, right?
Jose, did you have a question for Father Rohr?
No, you guys are doing a good job.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Eli, did you have a question for Father Rohr?
Well, not really a question. Probably it's a little comment, and probably he can say more about this. But we're talking about true self and false self is just have experience, not only in transition, but in transformation. Like he said, we are in kindergarten, all religions, and we just live in that level of transitions, but we never go to transformation. A little bit.
So you want me to talk about
a little bit more the transition to transformation?
The difference?
Yes.
Between transitions
and transformation.
Yeah, okay. Transitions are necessary, but you're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, Transformation is when the Titanic really goes down, and your old self-image, your old identity, your old whatever you thought made you good, right, famous, rich, important, beloved of God, that has to die, because you can't earn what you have for free. That's what it comes down to. And that has to be a realization, well, more in here, really, than even in here. But finally, it has to be in both places, head and heart.
Because I grew up as an evangelical Protestant, and I thought I was transformed already because I stopped probably drinking alcohol, or don't be sociable with people we call pagans, don't go involved with people outside, or don't go to those places, or don't call.
That's all external.
Yeah.
It's all external. So, doesn't mean anything.
Exactly. I was in transition, but I never reached out the transformation.
Yeah.
No.
Father, I watched you on Portraits of Faith, and you talked about this place that you're at in your life. That's a beautiful place where you have done all this work, and now you can sit back and sit in your garden and watch the blades of grass. And so I want people to understand, I guess, through your journey, through our journeys from false self to true self, that there's this place that isn't some nebulous place, right?
No, it isn't.
Yeah. Can you talk a little about that, Father?
And it's not hard to get to. It's when you move from being a human doing to a human being. And just being a human being gives you satisfaction that God is allowing me to exist another minute. And as you said, that I'm sitting here looking at this grass. Why? Why do I exist at all? You know, when I don't know if you use the word in the same way in Spanish, but the gratuity of everything. The non-necessity. It didn't have to be this way, and it is. That's what we mean by the gratuity of everything. And when you get on that roller coaster, everything's gratuitous. It's all a gift. It's all unnecessary. And my only job is to learn how to appreciate it. Even the father wound, let's say.
Sure.
Now that takes much of your life. But I think he's already done it.
Yeah.
I hope you have too.
Father, let me ask you a quick question. So all four of us are leaders in our community. So part of our desire is to walk with men that some may be ready to face their wounds and are open to the love of God, to start that transformation. But what about, you know, I'm a pastor for the Methodist Church here in Houston.
Oh.
How do we, as leaders, influence other colleagues, you know, to create spaces that allow that type of luring and invitation, maybe for those that have been hurt by the church, you know, and are carrying some resentment because they were not held at the time they needed to be held. What's your take on that? What's been your experience as far as that type of influence as a leader?
They won't believe anything you say unless they first experience your life as representing it. You understand? They have to see, has Eli told you about order, disorder, reorder?
Yeah, we've talked about that.
That you have to have gone through some disorder and come out into reorder, and you're not bitter, and you're not cynical, and you're not angry, and you're not power hungry. And this power hungry thing is a big thing for men. And if you're a pastor, you know it's even true in the church. And they have to see that you're not that way. And then they'll believe your evangelization message. But you are so right. So many clergy, they've come to me for years, are so disillusioned by their church. They've seen it from the inside out.
Sure.
So just what I'm saying is, you guys, like you're doing right now, you just keep growing up spiritually and become more authentic and more authentic, although that's the work of God. You can't force it. And people will see that authenticity. And that gives your teaching authenticity. Yeah.
Father, I keep trying to direct this back to you in terms of your experience, but in January, this past January at the symposium, I heard you take the 10 Commandments and reduce them to 2. You said Jesus.
Well, Jesus did that.
Yeah.
Not me.
And we blame everything on you.
I'm just quoting Jesus.
Said Jesus reduced the commandments to love God and love your neighbor.
That's it.
Father, what were those pivotal experiences in knowing and feeling and receiving and giving love for you?
You know, James, I can't say there have ever been any that knocked my socks off, as we used to say. there've just been a whole bunch of good little ones, you know, wonderful friendships, kind people who entered my life. I did have loving parents, but not perfect parents by any means. I had more a mother wound than a father wound. My mother was a disciplinarian. She loved me, but I had to earn it. Now, my daddy, he didn't make us earn it. He just loved us. You just have to have enough unconditional love. Enough. You don't have to, you cannot insist on it from everybody. Just enough to know that it exists. And then you know that God exists. So I can't say there were any great, well, this man has certainly loved me very well, particularly in my old age, where I can do less and less for myself. So he's another one of those. But basically, it's the more you allow yourself to be loved, the more you allow yourself to be loved and trusted. Now, are you three all married?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then you have to go through this with your wife, I'm sure.
It's interesting because we've all struggled in relationship.
Oh, of course.
I was married for 17 years, and yeah, that marriage came to an end. I know. I don't want to speak for you, Jose, but Jose, you know, grew up without a father, and part of that was always having one or two women ready because he didn't want to make a commitment. So all these wounds that, and Victor, you know, same with his father wound, and Ellie, Eli finding someone to, like being vulnerable enough to allow somebody to love you.
Well put. It comes down to vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah, I shared today in a Zoom that I wasn't able to access, because of my pain and my sense of victimization, I wasn't able to access the love that was always around me. I just I couldn't allow.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why I made so much of don't play the victim.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dead end. It's a dead end.
Yeah.
It creates a barrier around you. Yeah.
Tied to what James is saying, it reminds me of what in your book, From Wild Men to Wise Men, when you talked about when you were doing prison ministry, talking to these huge guys, and you found out that they were very vulnerable, yet they I guess they masked it with a lot of anger and resentment that they had towards their father, and that's something common in the Latino community.
Very, very
Machista.
It's no accident we use the Spanish word. It's used all over Europe, every country. Mm-hmm. It says macho. Mm-hmm. Because the Spanish culture so represents that. And it melded in Mexico because the natives were often that way too. Yeah.
And I think, Father, before we started recording, we were talking about COVID and its impact on the Latino community. I know one of the figures that I heard is that nationally, 35% of the COVID cases are Latino. And this is a population where, you know, a large number are making under $40,000. Many don't have health care. They're called essential workers, which actually should be, that name really bothers me because it's almost like they're expendable.
Yeah.
They put food on our table, but they have no value to us. And so I wonder if you would speak to that in terms of what we do know is that because of that stress, because of the lack of stable housing, because of jobs, there's a lot of suffering in our communities of people misdirecting their
good word. Yeah. I hear in California it's 45% Latino.
Wow.
Can you imagine? Because the numbers are so huge. You know, I used to say in my early men's work that men are really rather simple human beings. We're much simpler than women after all is said and done. And what a man basically needs is respect. You show a man respect, he'll almost always show it back to you. People are surprised when I used to say that a lot, but they never disagreed with me. They know it's true. And when a man doesn't have a job, when a man can't feed his own children or pay for his own, he doesn't have basic respect. And he, unfortunately, domestic abuse is off the ceiling because he takes it out very often on the very woman that he loves and needs the most, because he feels she now doesn't respect him. So he puts on the macho role to demand respect. It doesn't work, of course. It's just the opposite. But just remember the first piece, that most men, if you give them basic respect, will give it back to you. And they're almost programmed to think you're not going to give it to them, you know, particularly if they're a minority in any way. Our black brothers, certainly our Mexican brothers, they've been told that we're the top and you're inferior.
Yeah, there's a defensiveness defaulted in their attitude towards whenever they're approached for that same reason, because society has dismissed them, so to speak.
Dismissed, that's right, that's right.
And part of the problem in our culture, and I was raised Catholic, is this judgmental God that we're presented with, right? That I have learned through you, Father, that I am not the worst thing I've ever done. Neither am I the worst thing that's ever been happened to me. That God,
yes.
Personally.
Well, I know there's a lot to forgive in the Catholic Church. You've obviously done a lot of that already, or you wouldn't be listening to me. But any institution you join, once you know it from the inside out, yeah, you'll see we've all got our garbage. There's no, you haven't read the heavy book on evil yet, have you?
Yeah.
No.
Great book.
That's the heaviest one.
It's a tiny little book.
It's only 100 pages, yeah, but you got to read it twice to understand it.
I mean, I think what you address in that book for me is the impact of trauma on.
Yes. Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
I'm presently of the belief most people on this earth since the beginning of time have had trauma. When you think of all the wars, all the villages that were burned down, you know, just the stories you hear when you read history, it just breaks your heart.
Yeah.
It must break the heart of God.
One of the things that you've taught us is the use of language. It's so important because the traditional way, like in Spanish, for instance, sin, even in English, it's such a sandpaper word. In Spanish, it's pecado.
Wow.
It's very condemning. So we've talked about this in our conversations, that brokenness seems to be more inviting, that we're all broken.
Wow.
And healing or the restoration comes from God's love. So that's more accepting. It's easy to even share to those that are hurting versus the typical, well, you're a sinner or eres pecador. And it's just very, kind of like you're already starting from the bottom, so to speak.
You haven't read, Victor, that book on evil yet, have you?
No, not yet.
Don't worry. Because the main point one of the main points is I am convinced from studying Romans and Galatians is that Paul's understanding of sin is the absurd human situation, the tragic sense of life,
Mhm.
all that which causes PTSD.
Mhm.
He's not even talking about you individually being a bad guy,
Mhm.
but that's the way we've all been trained to read.
Correct.
Yeah, our privates. You read Romans. That's why he says we've all sinned. And what he really means is we've all been sinned against by this broken reality,
Mhm.
this tragic human situation.
Correct. Correct.
So it's a sense of dis-ease. You're not connected.
Very good. Dis-ease. Yeah. So you've
Yeah.
read it already, James, huh?
I have, Father. I
Yeah, it's heavy. I know it's too heavy.
know
John Wesley has something similar to talking about that in his writings. He talks exactly about that. That
Does he?
it's a distorted image of God in us. It's like it got distorted with the fall. So it's or again, it's a more inviting that we
Yes.
go in hope of grace rather than no, we're done. And kind of like what you've taught us in the Universal Christ, that the starting point in many doctrines are like we're worthless, you're nothing, versus no, you're good. That was the before, like we all started and God said we are good. And so that's the point seems to have kind of been put in the back room now.
I don't want to.
Are you 100% Mexican, Victor?
Yes, I am. I was born in Mexico City.
You have a beautiful Aztec face.
Thank you so much.
I was going to film a movie. I'd use.
Thank
you were
you.
born in
so
Mexico City, really?
Yes, yes.
Oh.
Have you been? I'm sure.
Yes, with him.
Yeah,
him.
it's a beautiful city. I visited
overwhelming.
often. Yes, I have a lot of family.
You're young. Your English is very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the baby amongst the four of us.
He's the baby.
You-
He's your Aztec baby.
That's right. That's right.
Well, this is probably enough for this time.
Yes.
But thank you for being so trustful. If you want to keep talking, huh?
Oh,
Do you want to
well,
keep?
yeah.
Okay. You talk a little more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've done 3 filmings today.
Wow.
So my voice is getting.
No. Thank you so much, Father Rohr.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. We'll talk again.
Thank you.
Blessings.